Did you put that shelving in there or was that there?
Hmm?
Did you put that?
We had Susan.
Hello, can anybody hear me?
Bill Sheeler, is that you?
Yeah.
Hey, Bill, we're going to go ahead and mute you for a moment before we get the meeting started. We have everyone in mute mode.
Okay, sounds good.
Jerry, anytime.
Just one moment, Dave.
Okay.
Chair Davis, we're ready to begin.
Okay, thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the MTD Board of Directors meeting today on Tuesday, May 12th. This is our first video of that resort, so if there are any glitches and or stumbles as we go forward, I think everybody will understand that we're learning as we go. So I'd like to start with a roll call of the Board of Directors. Chair Davis, I'm here. Vice Chair Tabor.
Here.
Director Sheeler. Bill, unmute yourself and let me know you're here.
Here.
Thank you. Director Rodriguez.
Here.
Director Weinberg. You want to unmute yourself and let me know you're here?
Okay, McQuarrie and Weinberg.
Weinberg. Very good. And then Director Perotti.
I'm here.
Thank you very much. So all members are here today. As Mr. Estrada, can I have the report regarding the posting of the agenda and opening comments that you might like to make?
The agenda was posted on Thursday, May 7th, 2020 at MTD's administrative office, mailed and emailed to those on the agenda list and posted on MTD's website. Following some instructions regarding.
Can you hear, Dick?
This is a virtual meeting.
Hey, Director McQuarrie, you need to mute yourself while we're talking. Hey, thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Estrada.
This is a virtual meeting of the Board of Directors of the Santa Barbara Metropolitan Transit District. I will start by describing how this meeting will work. Board members will remain muted until they wish to speak, and Chair Davis will call on them. Each agenda item will be presented. Board members will ask questions of staff, then Chair Davis will call for public comment. There are 3 ways to provide public comment during this meeting: email, Zoom, webinar, and phone. There's actually 4. The meeting is being live streamed to MTD's YouTube channel, which can be found at tinyurl.com/SBMTD YouTube. The live stream is also embedded on MTD's website at the current board agenda page. To email your public comment, send an email to clerk@sbmtd.gov, noting which agenda item or items you are commenting on, whether or not you would like your comment read into the record, and the text of your comment. If you wish to have your comment read into the record, staff will read out the written public comment, limiting the reading to 3 minutes per person per item. If you are watching via the Zoom webinar and would like to give public comment, you can click the raise hand button once the agenda item you would like to speak on has begun. When the chair calls for public comment, the clerk will announce you and will unmute your microphone. Comments from the public are limited to 3 minutes per speaker. The public will not be able to share their video or screen. You may also participate by phone. If you have called into the meeting via phone, when the chair calls for public comment, the clerk will announce you and will unmute your microphone. Please mute your phone until you are called to speak. If you do not have a mute button, you may mute by pressing the star key followed by the number 6, *6. You can unmute by pressing the same keys, *6, to raise your hand on the phone, dial *9 when the item you wish to speak on is begun. When the chair calls for public comment, the clerk will announce you and you will unmute your microphone. As stated before, the comments from the public are limited to 3 minutes per speaker. And that concludes the reading.
Good, thank you very much, Mr. Estrada. That takes us to the consent calendar. There are 2 items on the consent calendar. First, item 4 is the Board of Directors will be asked to approve the draft minutes for the meeting of March 17th, 2020 and March 27th, 2020. Also is item 5, the cash reports. These are the cash reports for the following dates: March 7th through 27th, 2020, March 28th, 2020 through April 10th, 2020, and April 4th, 2020. I'm going to ask if there are any questions or comments on either of those two items. I will start with Sheeler. Director Sheeler, do you have any questions or comments on either of the consent calendar items? Please unmute
Nope.
yourself.
No
Go ahead.
questions.
Director Rodriguez,
No questions.
Director Weinberger McQuarrie, you want to unmute yourself, Chuck? Is having a technical issue there. Director Perotti,
No questions. Thank you, Chair.
Vice Chair Tabor.
I do have one question.
Go ahead.
I noticed on the cash reports, they were prepared for meetings that weren't held, so they have the dates of those meetings on the heading. Should those dates be changed to today's date?
Mr. Estrada?
We could make that change.
Okay.
Okay.
I haven't. Go ahead, Mr. Tabor.
Mr. Chair, without that change, I make a motion to approve the consent calendar.
Okay, I have a motion to approve. Is there a second?
Second, Rodriguez.
Second by Rodriguez. Okay, I will do a roll call vote. And if on Weinberg and McQuarrie, if you, I can't see you right now, but when I get there, if you want to raise your hand if you're having audio problems. Director Sheeler,
Yes.
Director Rodriguez,
Yes.
Director Weinberg, McQuarrie. We'll put them as abstained since they cannot answer. Perotti, Director Perotti, please.
Aye.
Yes. Director
Yes.
Tabor?
Aye.
Aye, and Director Davis votes aye. The motion passes basically 5 with two abstentions. That then takes us on to item 6, which is public comment for items which are currently not on the board's agenda. So, Mr. Estrada, are there any requests for public comment for items not on today's agenda?
No, Chair Davis, we see no public comments.
Great, thank you very much. Moving on then, go directly into item 7. This is fiscal year 2019 and 20 third quarter performance reports. We'll have a staff presentation followed by board comments and questions. We'll then take any public comment which is there. I'll then come back to the board for discussion and a possible motion. So, Mr. Estrada, you want to begin?
Yeah, just one moment while the presentation gets brought up to the screen.
Okay, we'll bring there.
I'm on it. Hi, everyone.
Hi, Hillary.
Okay, just start this slideshow. Thank you for bearing with all the new technology. Can everyone see my slides?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Great. Okay, so gonna walk through our quarterly report, and this is, information about the third quarter, so January through March, but also sort of the 9 months ending with the end of March 31st. Needless to say, things changed towards the middle of March. And if General Manager Estrada could mute, I think I'm getting a little bit of feedback. Okay, so ridership summary. These are the key performance indicators that we look at every quarter. Well, we look at them every month, but we present them every quarter. And these are the ones that we track and take a look at. Ridership by fare category, total passengers, revenue hours and miles, passengers per revenue hour, passengers per mile, the top 5 lines by ridership, top 5 lines by passengers per hour, numbers at a glance, some other numbers that we keep track of, UCSB and City College ridership, which is obviously generally a very large percentage of our ridership, and then on-time performance, which is something that we've really just been able to sort of feel confident in sharing this fiscal year. And so I'll have information about that as well. So like I said, it's been a strange quarter. So the first 2 months were looking very positive ridership wise. Actually in January, we saw ridership increases of 8.5%, February 7.8%. So we were looking good. And then you can see on this slide, these are some of the milestones, and General Manager Estrada will go into them a little later in his GM report, but these are, I know it's hard to have a sense of time these days, but this is kind of when everything started to happen. And so it really started to happen locally with UCSB deciding to move to online instruction and ending on-campus instruction. It did take several days for most of the student population to leave town, but as of March 11th, there was no further on-campus instruction. Campus wasn't closed technically, but people weren't coming to class, let's say. March 13th was the last day of City College instruction on campus. And so that next Monday, nobody's there. And slowly but surely, staff and faculty weren't there as well. Also, March 13th ended up being the last day of Santa Barbara Unified on-campus instruction. So that is another hit because we obviously have a lot of riders going to our junior highs and high schools. On March 15th, that's when the first positive case of COVID-19 was identified, a confirmed case in Santa Barbara County. And so then that week, March 16th was a Monday. Since there were no K through 12 schools, we eliminated the booster services that we normally run to our junior highs and high schools. The governor's stay-at-home order for the state of California went into effect March 19th. And we actually also on March 19th, which we'd been planning for a few days, was when we went to rear door boarding, we suspended fare collection, and we limited our transit center services as far as no sort of person-to-person transactions with our customer service reps. The 19th, we also did a first wave of reduced service. These were lines that, frankly, that serve mostly City College and UCSB students, so the ridership was really not there at that point. The lines 15X and 16 that serve City College students mostly, those were suspended. And then the line 28 that we have the partnership with UCSB that serves out in Isla Vista and UCSB, that was also suspended. Line 27 runs between Camino Real Marketplace, Isla Vista, and UCSB campus. We went to our alternate service, which thankfully we have a pre-built schedule, which this is something that goes into effect usually when UCSB is out of service and in summer, or out of session and in summer. And so we switched to that reduced service. So that is still running through the heart of Isla Vista, but on a reduced schedule. March 23rd was the first day where we officially restricted bus loads to a maximum of 8 passengers on a 40-foot bus and 5 passengers on 30-foot buses. so that we can maintain social distancing as best we can on those buses. And then April 6th, we did a further reduction in service. So keeping all those same reductions I mentioned before. But we also suspended lines 10. Line 10 serves the Cathedral Oaks corridor. And then line 30 and 34, which is downtown and waterfront shuttles. 36, which is the Seaside shuttle in Carpinteria. And 37, which is the Crosstown shuttle. Those were all suspended as of that date. And those are the last service reductions that we made. And so that's been in place for a little over a month. So I say all this to give you context of, right, the quarter that I'm presenting on, it's 3 months, but for really 2.5 of it, things were going normal or even well, ridership wise. So we're sort of buffered by it in this report. Certainly in the fourth quarter, we will see significant impacts. So this is year-to-date ridership by category. You can see that the total ridership there last year, year-to-date. So for the first 9 months, we had hit 4,762,907. That was down not very much because frankly, we've been up every month this fiscal year until March on ridership. So like I said, it doesn't look that bad here. Jerry will share some numbers later that show what it's looking like now. So you can see here, adult was down, student was up slightly, and all of these are frankly mostly flat for the quarter. Passenger hours and miles. This has the quarter numbers, the top 2 rows, and then year to date. So last year and this year. This shows total passengers like the other one did, but revenue hours for the quarter, we're up, and for the year, we're up. Same for miles, same for, so miles and hours as well. Look at passengers per revenue hour, down slightly in the third quarter, and I do attribute that to the fact that some of our most well-traveled lines were not being traveled at all, like the line 28. So you can see there the changes. Top 5 lines by ridership. No surprise, these are generally the top 5. They change position sometimes, but the line 11, still a workhorse for us. Line 28 obviously has a tremendous ridership. 6, 24X, and line 2. So these are very popular. Obviously, you can see 3 of the 5 serve UCSB, and that is where a lot of our services and a lot of our riders are generally, not today. Top 5 lines by passengers per hour. Again, you can see line 28 passengers per hour, the average for the quarter, 72 passengers per hour. That is not the highest it's been, but it's pretty tremendous if you put that up against really any any bus line, certainly in a city of our size. Then 27, 24X, 16, and line 17. So those are very well used. No surprise there with these numbers. These are year-to-date numbers at a glance. Like I said, we were up every month until March on ridership, which is why we're seeing for the first 9 months only a 0.3% reduction in ridership. That looks great. It's that's not going to hold, I'll just tell you, based on what we're seeing in the month of April and May. At capacity loads, we're up 33%, to full to board loads, up 67.9. These would have been up anyway, but obviously when we started later in the month, making that cap at 8 people, it's really easy to get to a 2 full to board load when you're only letting 8 people on. So these numbers for the next little while are going to be pretty skewed. Wheelchairs boarded was down slightly, as was bicycles carried for year to date. So again, this is UCSB student ridership down 2.1%, City College down 11.5. We actually, this was sort of, we had the initial, we initially noticed in, I believe, the first quarter of the year that City College ridership was up for the first time since, I think, 2015. Up very slightly. If you look at January and February numbers, City College ridership was up 7.8% in January and 1.6% in February. So I'm not sure if that's a relationship to enrollment, what they were seeing or not, but that's something that we're looking into. Obviously, right now, ridership is extremely low because of COVID. On-time performance, I've been showing you this is for third quarter, so this isn't year to date, this is third quarter, because we really do want to break these out by quarter, and we continually make changes. As you can see in the staff reports, we set a goal of, or you set a goal of trying to keep our on-time performance above 80%. Basically, if a line is consistently running below 80% on time, that's when we want to sort of pop the hood and see what's going on, see what we can change schedule-wise or operationally. I'm very happy to report that for the first quarter this year, in this quarter, the third quarter, we have no lines below 80% on average. So that's great. I'm really, really proud of our planning team and obviously our operations staff and our drivers for making that happen. So 23 of the 25 lines that we track were above 85% on time. There were 2 that were between 80 and 85%. Those 2 were the line 28 and the line 10. And we had plans we're working on on-time performance for line 28. So very proud of this. I would say someone asked me, oh, well, COVID, so your on-time performance should be good. There was no traffic. But the fact that this is really looking at 2.5 months of normal traffic, I think this is something to be proud of for sure. Then we also look at system-wide on-time performance by amount of service on lines. And so that's taking basically all the trips that a given line takes in the quarter and seeing how many were above 80 or below 80. And so we had for the quarter 98,177 trips and 100% were above 80%, which you could have guessed from that earlier one. This is the best donut chart I've ever made, where it's just 100% a good thing. So we're proud of this, and obviously we're being very clear-eyed about the situation, but we also want to make sure we stop and look back at the work we've done to make this happen. So we continue to monitor all of these things, even in this strange time we're in, but knowing that for ridership, obviously fare revenue, which we talked about later, but on-time performance, there's going to be a certain amount of both as we move forward, and then once we get past this situation, it's going to be hard to look at year over year because of this, much like it was, I mean, much more than it was, but much like it was in the Thomas Fire and debris flow when our service was thrown off and the community was sort of put into uncharted territory. So with that, that's what I have on this presentation. Happy to take questions from the board.
Great, thank you very much. Great presentation, Hillary. I
Thank you.
enjoyed the report.
And I'll keep the slides up in case anyone wants me to go back.
Okay, so my process again on an item like this is I'm going to go through and first ask board members individually if they have questions at this point. Hold your comment for after the public comment, but if you have questions of staff at this point, and you can simply say no, and then I'll move on to the next board member. So again, I'm doing it for the agenda. Director Sheeler, do you have any questions?
I don't have any questions.
Thank you. Director Rodriguez,
I don't have any questions.
Director Weinberg or McQuarrie? If you don't have sound, you can do yes, no.
No questions.
Excellent. Does Dick, do you have any questions?
No question.
Excellent. Parodi, Director Parodi?
I just have I'm just curious to the ridership, if we know the ridership that we have now that are using on MTD, are essential workers? Are they're going to work? Are they doing errands? Are they going to the store? Do we know anything about, just out of curiosity, who's using the bus right now?
It's a pretty good guess that yes, they are essential workers or people who need to make essential trips to get groceries or food. As Jerry will share, our ridership is, since COVID, is down. It took a few days to get there, but it's down by about 85%. And so we see basically kind of what we're carrying on a day-to-day basis is anywhere between, except for weekends, it's much lower, but on a weekday, an average weekday, whatever that means now, there's, between 4,000 and I'd say 5,800 people on the bus, when normally we're used to carrying like 24,000 a day. So yeah, I mean, we definitely know that there are people who are, healthcare workers, people who are working in restaurants, certainly, and other kinds of, grocery stores, things that are certainly still open and are essential, but that's how they get to work.
So I'm assuming that as things start moving into a different phase 2, possibly, that maybe the ridership will continue to rise or will go up.
Yeah, I'll let Jerry address that. I think he's going to be talking about that in his GM report.
Right. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Vice Chair Tabor?
No questions.
No questions, okay. I have a comment and a question. I want to appreciate the report, really great report. Yes, I believe that we're going to be looking at a new norm, and it may take us a year or two, and then during this period, we'll have to bracket it and essentially know that that was this period, and to see whether that is the new norm going forward. A year over year is not going to really mean much, so we're really going to be establishing a new framework for how we do this. And the other question I had was, I love the fact that you have a donut hole a donut which is totally green, right? 100%, right? And again, in terms of performance goals, is it possible to break it out one more time into greater than 90%? And I bring it up because performance goals are really essentially setting where's the bar? How do you improve service? And right now, if we knew that there were lines that were there and pulling up from the bottom and extending to the top, in the future, could we look at above 80, above 85, and then above 90?
Yeah, we can do that. And, we hadn't really done that before because we still had stuff below 80. So if this remains a consistent trend, we can certainly break those out. And one thing I want to mention about that, one thing to share is, things that count as not on time are certainly late, but also early. And so that's something that we stressed in our last sort of staff-wide training for employee-wide training for all our drivers that they do quarterly is to eliminate earlies. And so to really make sure that they're not leaving a stop early. Obviously that messes with our numbers, but more importantly, it messes with someone's day if the bus leaves before it's supposed to. And so I think we're bearing some fruit from that campaign.
That's a great clarification. Thank you for that comment. Okay, at this point, I will then go to Mr. Estrada. Do we have anyone from the public which wishes to speak on this item?
Oh, we do. Okay, it's Howard Green. Hillary, if you can mute. It'll be Mr. Howard Green. I'm about to give him the microphone.
Okay,
Mr. Green.
Mr. Green, unmute yourself and, or Jerry, unmute him. And Mr. Green, you have 3 minutes, please. Mr.
I have to unmute myself.
There you go. You're on. There you go.
Thank you, sir. I very much appreciate the report that Hillary gave. A good discussion of the events in March, puts things into context very nicely. One of the charts she had showed the top lines in passengers per hour. And all of those 5 lines serve higher education campuses. And I think that's important because at least right now, those lines are being affected or even not in service. There was a chart in the meeting announcements that was not covered with any detail, and that was the at capacity problem. Certainly that's been a bigger problem, and Jerry's reports will cover that, I believe. But I'm concerned with that capacity in the lines 16 and 15X, the at capacity and too full to board. Those charts are not they were in the packet, but not in the presentation. Year-to-date, line 16 at capacity is 36 and too full to board is 15. Those are year-to-dates. That's too many. 15X has 165 at capacities and 243 too full to board. I've previously raised questions about some cutbacks that were discussed earlier for line 16. So I just like to keep those numbers in mind as we get back to a normal operation. The last thing is that the on-time report does not include the shuttle. It includes in the packet that there's no schedule published for lines 30 and 34, but in truth, there is a schedule that is maintained in the system. And I think as long as the system schedule is available legally, I think it should be considered published, and on-time performance in the future should be included for lines 30 and 34, the shuttles. That's all I have at this time, and I thank you for your opportunity to speak.
Thank you for your comments, Mr. Green, very much. Okay, Mr. Estrada, are there any other public comments?
None on this item.
Okay, then I'm going to come back and we'll go back through the board relative to any comments. And we'll start at the top again, Director Sheeler.
I just want to say thank you for the report, but no comments.
Good. Director Rodriguez.
Ditto, I want to say thank you for the report, and I have no comments other than it's hard to look at these numbers because they kind of aren't going to mean anything, honestly, like just around the corner. But I mean, they do, and I'm not trying to dispel the numbers, but I know that everything has dramatically changed. So it was hard to look at them and analyze them critically based on what's going on. So I'm hopeful, but new normal. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Director Weinberg?
Dick, comment?
No comment.
No comment. Macquarie?
No comment. The only comment I have is that report looks like New York City on December 10th, 2001. So, you know,
Yeah, exactly
the
right.
axe is gonna fall.
Right, absolutely. Director Perotti?
Sorry, I had mute. Great report. Thank you, Hillary. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Good, thank you. And Vice Chair T.
Again, thanks to Hillary for the report. If anyone had asked me what my favorite donut was before today, I wouldn't have said a green one. But you changed my mind on that. I think reading this report, you have to be happy with our efforts up to date. We're in a different mode right now. And I think we're looking into the next phase and whatever strategic changes we have to make to get through the next phase. I think this report may help us get to that next phase a little in good shape. I think we have some answers with our information gathering on the boosters and how we're using the boosters, and maybe we can improve how we do that to get to better performance. Maybe looking at our capacity on the buses, our 40 footers at eight per bus. I noticed some other agencies are doing 10 and maybe a little bit more. Maybe the next phase we can look at how we can safely do that. And I was looking at the numbers on the BYDs where we get such great cost per mile on them. And maybe in the next phase, we can figure out a way to incorporate them on some of the other lines and save a little bit of money in the next phase. And I was glad to see the changes to the organizational chart. It looked nice and clean this time. Thank you.
Good, thank you very much. My comment again, I will echo Vice Chair Tabor. I really want to congratulate staff. If you think about all the mega trends that we have been facing that caused decreasing ridership over the last 5 to 7 years, what you see, at least in the end of this, at the beginning of this period, is in fact, staff had made and the organization had made great strides towards making that up. And in fact, we are on a really good trend. And again, now dealt another exogenous card out of the deck. And we're back to basically, and I have confidence that this organization will step up to meet the challenge that we have coming up. So again, good job. For that.
Thank you. And I do also want to publicly recognize the staff and in planning, we rolled out 2 major service reductions in the space of really 2.5, 3 weeks. There is a lot of behind the scenes work that goes into that. And normally something that would take us 3 months to do, they did in about a week to do a new emergency bid and all that. All the things that the public never really sees, and frankly, a lot of the things that the drivers don't even see. And so, I want to thank Mark and Jennifer and Tony for all the work that they did, cranking things out and making sure that it works well. We've got a really, obviously it's a horrible time, but it's really, a lot of people are shining really brightly on our team, and I want to recognize that.
Great. Well, here to that. Great comment. Thank you. And thank them for the board. We will move on now. This is going to take us to item 8. This is the fiscal year 2019-20 financial audit services. Recommendation is that the board of directors approved an engagement letter with Brown Armstrong, a CPA firm, to carry out the audit for fiscal year 2019 and 20. Mr. Estrada.
Yes, I'll be, well, you have the staff report before you. I can hand this off to Mr. Davis to give you the details. Brad?
Great. Brad Davis.
Okay, good morning, members of the board.
Good morning.
This is, this item before you is rather pro forma. It's something we bring to you every year. It's sort of a formal process to get the audit going, and essentially it delineates the responsibilities and the goals of what the financial auditor is trying to accomplish when they review the current fiscal year. It also delineates some of MTD's and staff's responsibilities, as well as some of the limitations of what the reports will actually accomplish as well. This is, you may recall that it was about a year ago at this time that we went through a request for qualifications / request for proposals in order to obtain a new audit firm, since McGowan Gutterman had bowed out of the government auditing process. We did at that time bring a recommendation to the board for Brown Armstrong, which was approved. It's for a 2-year contract, and this is the 2nd year of that contract. And the price will be $39,990, which is the same amount that we paid last year. And that's pretty much it.
Thank you for the report, Mr. Davis. Takes us to staff or board questions. Again, we're going to go through the rule. Any questions for Mr. Davis or Mr. Estrada on this item? Director Sheeler.
Yes, I just had one question. Is there any feedback from staff on how you feel that this new consultant is doing, Brown Armstrong?
Yes, of course, last year was the initial year, and so it was, we were all getting our feet wet together here, having been utilizing McGowan Gunterman for a number of years before that. I think it went very well. We, in the end, it was accomplished in more quickly than it had been in the past. So all in all, I would say that, you know, it went quite well, and they, you know, they brought up some points that hadn't been brought up before, which, you know, would be expected with the new firm coming in. And so it's good to see that they're looking at things deeply, and I think it's a good fit right now.
Director Rodriguez.
I just have one quick question, and I'm not sure anybody can answer it. So the contract is for the $39,990 for the year, right? For a 2-year contract, correct?
That's correct.
Do you remember, or do you remember the numbers from our previous contract at all? Not with Brown, I mean with the previous agency.
Yeah, the prior year to that, we had paid $48,000. Our normal base price with McGowan Gunterman had been about $42,000, but there was some extra work associated with some government accounting standards board changes. But quite frankly, there were some of those changes in effect last year as well, but they were included in the base price.
Thank you. Thank you. No more questions.
Director Weinberg.
No.
Dick, any questions? Good. Director McQuarrie.
No questions. No questions.
Excellent. Director Perotti.
No questions, thank you.
Vice Chair Tabor.
Just one question. Brad, have they indicated whether they're going to use the same staff this year as they did last year?
Yes, they are.
Yeah, good. Okay. Thanks.
Good, great. My only question, again, it's the 30,000 foot. How is this particular audit, how is it used by us?
I'm sorry, how is it what by us?
How is it used?
The main purpose of the audit is to fulfill requirements by our funding agencies and generally accounting, government accounting standards. In particular, It's required by the Federal Transit Administration based on the fact that we received a substantial amount of funds from them. It's also required by the state via the Transportation Development Act, which provides a large source of our sales tax revenue, as well as which are now at this point pretty much expired, some of the old PTMI, SEA, and Office of Safety funds that funded a large part of our capital projects over the last 10 years.
Great, thank you. That answers my question. Mr. Strada, are there any public comments on this item?
No public comments.
Okay, then we go to board comment and or a motion. Are there any comments? Or is there a motion to approve the engagement letter with Brown and Armstrong?
Motion to approve.
I have a motion by Rodriguez. Is there a second?
I'll second that. Brody.
Second by Brody. Okay, we will do a roll call vote on the motion. This is to approve the engagement letter. Director Sheeler,
Yes.
Director Rodriguez,
Yes.
Director Weinberg,
Yeah. Yes.
Director McClory,
Yes.
Director Perotti.
Yes.
Vice Chair Tabor,
Yes.
and Chair votes yes. That motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Davis, for the presentation. That will take us on to item number 9. This is the fiscal year 2019-20 financial update. Mr. Estrada.
Yes, Chair Davis, thank you. I will be bringing the presentation up on the screen in a moment.
Okay.
I'd like to be, while that's getting worked on, just want to say I really appreciate how hard the finance department has worked. We're a little bit shorthanded, as you can imagine, right? Probably the busiest time of the year when you're trying to do quarterly reports, prepare a budget for next year. Perhaps to have all this happen was quite a challenge, and I really want to commend both Thais and Brad for their work, and Diana. They've done a great job to get us here. But with this financial update, I'd like to open up before I hand it off to Brad. Like to share a few things. Originally, this was going to be a quarterly update, much like the ridership and the performance indicators. We've expanded this particular presentation to also include our best guess at what we think we're going to see in the fourth quarter. So when I hand it off to Mr. Davis, one, he'll be sharing with you how we performed financially for the first 9 months of the fiscal year. But then also really what I think everybody is most curious with is what do we think is coming at us over the next few months? What are the things that really going to impact that? Obviously, the public health emergency, the pandemic, has had it's taken its toll on our economy. For MTD in particular, some of the actions we've taken in response have financial consequences, such as essentially not taking fares at this point so that we could board our passengers through the back. That was done to protect our employees. We stand by that. Most in the industry have taken that similar action when they can. And I think the results reflect that. So that's something you're going to see. Fortunately, I think this is important for us, and I think for everyone in the industry, was the CARES Act funding, the federal legislation that passed had a significant amount of funding for Santa Barbara urbanized area, which MTD, his board of directors, is the grantee, and essentially gets to essentially declare the project, which then go through SBCAG for approval as well. And those particular funds, which are for reimbursement for costs directly incurred as a result of the CARES, as a result of the global pandemic, that's something we're going to be looking at over this next quarter and through the next year. And those funds in particular are really critical for us to get through that period. If we're not able to collect fares, ridership is going to be lower. That's going to have a major impact in our operating budget of the 28 million. 8 million of that is fares, and another 10 million is sales tax. So those two funding sources are going to be directly impacted by the pandemic. And Brad's going to give you our best estimates at this point. But honestly, what you've seen, what we put in the staff report is probably optimistic for the first quarter. And, you know, at this point, I'll hand it off to Brad to take you into the details, and then we'll answer any questions you have. So with that, Brad.
All right, thank you, Jerry. If you could go to the next slide, please. Pablo or Hillary? Thank you. Okay, a lot of numbers. It's difficult to talk about this without talking about the numbers, but what we have here initially are the operating results for the first 9 months of the fiscal year. As Jerry mentioned, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, and the good news is that I don't need to, because we're pretty much in line with the budget. But if you could please go back, please. Can you go back to the 9-month slide, please?
Sorry, Brett, there's a little bit of a lag. It should go.
Okay. Anyway, there are certainly some trends worth mentioning for the first 9 months. First of all, we were experiencing a slight surplus over that period, while we did expect a slight deficit. In reality, these figures are small enough. They're 1% and under from deviations from the approved budget. So I don't put too much confidence that this has going to have a reflection for the year. And obviously, with the onset of the COVID pandemic, it certainly is going to change considerably. But looking a little bit deeper at the numbers, I think, of course, the biggest factor that affected these was the suspension of fare collection that occurred in the latter half of March, and that did definitely have an effect on our fare revenue. And as you can see in the table, the top line fare revenue under the revenue category, that there is a variance of $200,000, about 4%. We had been experiencing a slight, we were slightly under budget before that, but the most of this reduction from budget expectations is definitely associated with the last 10 days or so of March. The good news is that with respect to our grants and subsidies, our sales tax revenue at March 31st were exceeding expectations, particularly the Measure A receipts. And this was enough to more than offset the fare revenue reduction from stopping collection of fares. Unfortunately, it's probably the last good news we're going to hear about sales tax revenue for quite some time. Really, those are the big items under revenue for the first 9 months. Regarding expenses, we're pretty close to the budget as far as our route operations cost and our general overhead cost. Some of probably the best news is it's really gratifying to see that our workers' compensation costs were under budget for the quarter, after the significant rise that happened during the first 6 months of the year that caused a budget revision to bring additional revenue from capital back to the operating budget. So that is, we consider to be very, very good news, and we can hope that that continues on for the rest of the year and beyond that, of course. We also saw a reduction in cost in vehicle maintenance associated with vendor bus repairs. This has been going on basically since Nolan Robertson, our new maintenance manager, came on a couple of years ago. We've put a greater emphasis upon mechanic training in the last, over the last 2-year period, and I think it's really paying off as we're bringing more work in-house. And there's two advantages to that. Before I get to that, I want to say we've been able to do this without having to bring on additional mechanics or to reduce our normal work that is occurring. But what the benefits of it are, one, it does occur at a lower cost than otherwise when we send these buses out for repairs at satellite locations. And another thing is that it really reduces the downtime of the bus. We were having significant problems with buses being out for 5-9 months at a time, awaiting repairs at some of these major repair locations that are just backed up significantly. So I think a little bit beyond the scope of this discussion, but that's going to really help us down the road. We also saw a note in the third line down under expenses, passenger accommodations, that's 7% under budget. There are a number of items responsible for that, but the two biggest ones are we are seeing lower costs in our printed bus books as the band continues to go down. Now that we have electronic or we have real-time information over the cell phones as well as our website. So that's good news to hear that. And also the marketing department has been somewhat distracted with a number of things of late. And this started actually with the preparation of some of our large grants that we have pending with the state, with the TIRSA grant in particular. So some of the marketing activities did slow down in the third quarter, resulting in being under budget there as well. But and overall, essentially, we're 1% under budget. And again, that's a relatively small portion. I just heard a beep. I hope that means everything's okay. In any event, that pretty much includes what I have to say about the 9-month financial update. And with that, I'm going to move on to the projection for next year, or excuse me, for the balance of this fiscal year and its effects on the whole year. So if we can move to it, well, it's already up there. There it is. You're ahead of me. Okay, probably the most important thing to look at on this operating budget projection slide, just actually before I talk about that, this looks very similar to the previous slide, but you will note that this encompasses the entire fiscal year, with the first column representing where we believe our revenues expenses will be at the end of this year. And of course, the budget column representing the board approved budget, in particular, the budget revision that occurred last February. But looking down at the bottom line, the thing that jumps out is, of course, is that the significant growth in the projected deficit. It had been planned from the outset of the year that we would have about a $500,000 deficit that the intent was to pay for through the use of reserves. Additionally, the power just went out here. My computer's still on. If somebody give me a nod, everything's okay.
You're fine. You're fine, Brad. You're fine. Keep going.
Okay. Let's see. So we're seeing a big jump as is included here. It's up to nearing $1.5 million. As General Manager Estrada mentioned earlier, we've been looking at some of the assumptions behind these figures, and it's actually looking like we're probably going to see less of a reduction in route operations costs than is projected here. And so we do expect to see that figure to go up and get closer to about $2 million. Of course, what's not included in this table is the CARES Act funding. It's pretty much all but certain we've submitted the grant. It's being looked at. We know some agencies have received their funding, so we're highly confident that that is happening. And that will be used to balance the budget shortfall in addition to the usage of reserves. Just a reminder, I don't know if you're aware that there is definitely a restriction on the usage of the CARES Act funding. It's meant to offset increases in costs and losses in revenue that are specifically related to the COVID-19 pandemic, the economic consequences of that. So at least at this point, it's looking like we will need to use our $500,000 in reserves as part of balancing the budget. With that, if you could move on to the next slide, please. Okay. This bar chart, just to briefly let you know what it's the information it's showing is we're at the bottom scale there, going up to $30 million. That just basically reflects our operating revenue level, and the budget bar chart going vertically, as you can see, ends over there at about 28 million, which is our approved budget at this point. And the upper bar, the projection, indicates that we anticipate that operating revenue is going to be just a little over 25 million for a total decrease of 10%. Our largest source of operating revenue is our sales tax revenue, and that includes the transportation. The majority of it includes the Transportation Development Act Local Transportation Fund, which we tend to refer to as the TDA LTF funds, and that's from statewide sales tax. And it also includes the local Measure A sales tax revenue that is received by MTD for operating purposes. We're showing a 6% reduction for this fiscal year. Now, what with the plummeting of economic activity and its effect on sales tax revenue that's really been strong since the middle of March, one might think that that figure would show a much larger drop, but the reason that it doesn't is because there's a lag time between the collection of sales tax receipts by the state and when the state distributes them to local agencies such as MTD. So really, we're going to see, I believe we're going to see the first big hit on our sales tax revenue with the May payment, which we don't receive yet. We'll receive that at about the beginning of June, and then that's going to expand in the June payment, representing roughly April and probably part of March. So this is going to carry over into the next fiscal year, which of course that'll be the topic of the budget discussions at our next board meeting. Also limiting the reduction in sales tax revenue for this year is that we were, as mentioned, over budget at the 9-month period by several $100,000. So that will also soften the blow for this year. Next category, providing the next highest amount of our revenue is for fares. And as you can see in the green portion of the chart on the upper chart, that we're anticipating that overall passenger fares will be down about 25%, which is not surprising given that basically we're essentially collecting no fares during the fourth quarter of our fiscal year. With that, I want to talk about fares a little bit more in depth. And so if we could go to the next slide, please. Okay. Not unexpectedly, our cash and pass sales make up the bulk of our fare revenue, make up about 55% of that. And of course, we are going to see a huge drop in that because of the fact that we're not collecting fares. It's a little bit more than the 25% represented a quarter, of course, because we began that policy earlier in March. And additionally, we were also a little bit under budget as far as our fares collected up to that point in time. Our next largest category in fare revenue comes from the agreements with Santa Barbara City College and UCSB, where we receive a contract fare payment that allows the students to board the bus for free. With the schools, the universities ceasing on-site services in early to mid-March, we are going to be receiving less contract revenue for that. As it's, we're certainly not going to be charging the university for the fourth quarter when school is not in session and everybody else is riding for free. That's going to be pretty big. It's going to be about a $350,000 hit for the spring quarter of UCSB and about $200,000 reduction from SBCC. That is not shown in the figure right now, as we received all of those SBCC fare revenue for the spring quarter in advance, and where we will see a reduction next year in all likelihood as we take that credit against their next fare payment. With respect to the downtown waterfront shuttle indicated in gray, we're going to see a big drop in that revenue as we have that is included in the service suspensions, and thus the fare buy down income we'll receive from the city of Santa Barbara we will not be receiving during the last quarter of this year. All right, if you go, that concludes the fare revenue aspect. If you go back one slide, please. Okay, it brings us to our next source of operating revenue, which is our federal operating revenue, generally through the Federal Transit Administration. We are seeing an increase in the in the federal operating assistance for this year. Most of that is not related to a big increase in the subsidy we're receiving that year, although part of it is, as the actual appropriation of our Formula 5307 funds for this year is actually greater than what we had in the budget by a couple of $100,000. But it also includes utilizing all of the funding for the year for operating purposes. Without going too deeply into this topic, you may recall we had set aside funding to capital purposes as part of in preparation for the likely reduction in operating assistance in the future years based on the results of the 2020 census. So we're just thinking it in this is a time of difficulty and uncertainty with respect to our revenues. We want to kind of revert back to our normal pattern of using our full 5307 funds for operating purposes. On the flip side of that is that we also had brought state transit assistance funds normally used for capital over to operating since the recommendation to fully utilize the FTA formula funds for operating purposes. It's really no longer necessary to allocate those STA funds to the operating budget. So in the budget projection, it includes shifting that $600,000 back to the capital reserves. With respect to other revenue sources, really those are the four big ones are local operating assistance, property tax revenue, advertising revenue, and interest income, with the latter two really only making up 3% of overall revenue. But the largest one affected by the economic effects of the health pandemic is the local operating assistance. In particular, a large part of that is composed of the subsidy received from UCSB for the Line 28 as well as income received from SB CAG for the operation of the first last mile bus service that serves the Amtrak commuter train, as both of these services have also been suspended as a reaction to the situation that we're currently in. Of course, there will be no corresponding subsidy payments from those agencies, which will further bring down our operating revenue. And just briefly on advertising, we're already seeing a drop in advertising sales occurring in this quarter, and with a rather steep drop in interest rates lately, our interest income is going to definitely dip below what our originally projected amount was for the year. That covers the operating revenue. I'm going to get back to operating expenses, which is actually a fairly brief discussion, as the economic effects on our operating expenses is fairly limited. So actually, if you could go back one slide, please. Okay, so what we're concerned with here is the bottom half of that table, the expenses portion. And as can be seen in that first line item under expenses, route operations, that is seeing the vast majority of the impact from the health situation. And that, of course, that's related to the fact that we are suspending a number of services. In fact, that suspension is about 25% of our overall revenue hours. And of course, that affects our driver wages as well as their fringe benefits. And so that really encapsulates the majority of the effects on.
You want to move on to capital?
Excuse me?
I said, do you want to move on to the next item?
Okay, yeah, I'm going to be done in a sec here, and then I'll turn it back to the board. There is actually, I don't have a capital discussion at this point.
Okay, good.
Okay. I mean, really, that pretty much covers the operating expenditure projection for the fiscal year. So that completes the presentation, other than just to mention that while we're seeing a rather significant dip in our operating revenue, the good news is that the federal government has provided a source that will essentially help us to break even for the existing fiscal year. And that concludes my presentation.
Great, thank you, Mr. Davis. It was a detailed presentation. Thank you very much. Jerry, I want to ask you, are there any public comment on this particular item before we go to the board?
I see none.
Brad, you want to mute yourself? Thank you. I'm sorry, Jerry, I didn't catch that.
I see no public comment.
Okay, no public comment. So we will go, this is a presentation, so we'll go to board for questions and comments. So any questions or any comments that you might have on Mr. Davis's presentation on the budget and where we're at or where we're at. I'll start at the top, Director Sheeler.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just one quick comment. It's my understanding from talking to the enrollment management people at UCSB, they're going to continue to do offline curriculum or online curriculum through the rest of the calendar year. So they don't expect to have students back in classes until probably January at the earliest, which continues to affect the taking in of campus fees. The two questions I have to do with Q4, quarter four, and what might be the anticipated percentage reduction in route operations and in fuel costs for quarter four? Because you could take those quarters and sort of then extrapolate them into 2021, because quarter four is going to be more indicative of quarter one and quarter two going forward.
Chair
Okay,
Davis?
Go
Yeah,
ahead,
Chair
Brad.
Davis, you want Brad?
Yes. Go ahead, Brad.
Okay. Good question. I mean, it depends upon, of course, what we do with our service reductions and how long they stay in effect. At this point, it's a 25% reduction, so we would expect to see a 25% reduction, at least in direct driver-related cost. It takes a little bit before that affects our other operating expenses. It needs, our fixed costs and our support and administrative costs. Typically, there would be a need to be more of a permanent drop in that. As far as fuel expenditures, we're going to see a corresponding drop in that as well, the cost of that. However, a large part of the service suspensions are provided by our electric vehicle fleet, so we do not expect to see a 25% reduction in fuel costs, but of course there will be a decrease in our electricity costs that charges the vehicles.
Other questions, Bill?
No, that's it. Thank you very much.
Good, thank you. Director Rodriguez. Yeah.
Yes, I have a question. So is it just assumed, based on what's going on, that all contracts that we would have entered into with Santa Barbara City College, UCSB, SBCAG, is it just assumed that they're all not going forward? There's no breach, no one's continuing them. When are talks gonna start up again? Next year? Are we not talking at all? When do we even get a sense of when we start to plan for the next phase?
Mr.
Or
Estrada.
is that just not happening?
Mr. Estrada, Jerry?
Yeah, Chair Davis. I was gonna, during the general manager's report, seek a ad hoc committee of the chair of the board and the chair of the finance committee that would work with me to work on all of our agreements. We were already having conversations with a few of the entities. It's everything from the university, the community college, the city of Santa Barbara. So yeah, we've got a lot of work to do on that front, and that's really coming up next. I think what it comes down to, Director Rodriguez, is the sales tax numbers. What you see in the presentation, again, as Mr. Davis pointed out, is skewed by the first 9 months, and the fact that the sales tax returns lag a few months. Once we see what May looks like in June, our partners will see that, city of Santa Barbara, for example, the university, community college, figure out what they're going to do through the year. Then we'll be able to sit down and have some discussions about how we want to amend temporarily those agreements to reflect the demand. So we'll be back to the board probably this summer once we know what that looks like.
Okay. And just one other question, and it might be also in the report, but if we get money from the CARES Act, do we then, are we basically stopped from like not going forward with anything? Just like, employers, if you get the money, then you can't reduce your force. It's to make us whole, correct? So if we can, do you know what I'm trying to say? If you get that money, then you have these restrictions. Is that correct? Even for us, for like
Yes and no. I mean, it's being treated like 5307 funds, federal formula funding, which we typically get. And those rules stand. There's some are specific items related to CARES that it has to do with COVID-19. There are a number of things you can use it for. Primarily, it's to keep the district whole. It can be used also on the workforce front, potentially, and that's why we're trying to keep service levels reasonable. As Mr. Davis mentioned, we're down 25%. We've suspended 8 of our 24 lines at this point, which reflects, the demand out there. And we've managed to keep our workforce together. Going forward, I can't tell you what that'll look like with the pandemic. We could lose drivers as we feared. It hasn't happened yet. There's a lot of unanswered questions. So those funds don't necessarily guarantee anything. And the big question that I have is, how do we make those funds last about 24 months? I think it's going to take at least 2 years probably to get through this. That's just a guess, but talking to other CEOs in the industry, that seems to be the horizon folks are trying to plan for. So that's what we're really focused on in the fourth quarter is what is our sales tax numbers going to look like? How do they start to recover? What's reopening look like? And how do we make those CARES funds last that entire 2 years? And we'll be back with more information throughout the summer. I mean, essentially, we're going to be bringing you a budget in June, which will answer some of these questions, but we don't know how it's all going to come together throughout the fall. So we're going to be coming back quite honestly. Finances will probably stay on the agenda for quite some time. So.
Thank you. No further questions. Thank you for the report. Thanks, Brad.
Great, thank you. Director Weinberg, questions or comments?
How the hell did you guys do all this? With all the pressure and all the problems that just keep coming up, new, fresh every day. And you can still sit there and talk about it and smile and set up a budget that works and you work to the budget. I just congratulate and I'm so proud of all of you. And I think you've done an outstanding job. Thank you very, very much.
Hear, hear. Good comment. Thank you, Dick. Chuck, Mr. McCory?
Yeah, any question I have is just gonna have to wait till we see what happens in this next year. I mean, right now we're coming out reasonably well in spite of everything for this year's budget, but and just looking at next year, it's not only a question of what kind of money are we going to get or funding are we going to get, but what kind of programs are going to continue. You know, for example, we shut down the shuttle service and the city of Santa Barbara. I guess the big question is that service going to continue? And things like that we just don't know the answer to. But to me, those are the big questions we're going to be facing this next year. So I just can't ask one specific question because there's too many of them that are unanswered that we're not going to have any idea on where it's going to go until time goes on. So.
Thank you very much. Yeah, we're looking at a new reality that we're all going to be learning together because we're all in it.
Right.
Okay. Takes us to Director Perotti. Paula.
Thank you, Chair. I agree. The questions are, there's so many questions. There's so much uncertainty at this point. I think that this is going to be a discussion, financial discussions that we're going to be having for quite a while. So I'm not asking any questions because I'm not interested. It's just more like, I don't know what to ask at this point because of the unknown moving forward. But I appreciate it, everybody working so hard on this. Thank you, Brad. And we'll get through it. We'll figure it out together and we'll work on it as it comes. So thank you.
Okay, that takes us to Haver. David, do you have any questions or comments?
Yeah, let me catch my breath. I appreciate the projection aspect of this quarterly report because I think it gets us back onto a normal budgeting track. Normal budgeting track is we make budget adjustments in January, February, then we do a draft budget for the next fiscal year. A couple weeks later, we tinker with that for the next 3 months and then do a final in June. Well, we had those first two steps already and we're pretty much tearing those up and throwing them out the window. But this kind of takes the place of that step. So I'm glad to hear Brad say that we're looking at some sort of draft budget at the next meeting or two, because it has to happen that way. And I think all the questions that we're all circling around and avoiding at this stage, we'll be able to get our heads around a little bit better when we get that, when we see those numbers in front of us for what we're projecting for next year and what guesses we're going to make as to what's going to happen. Yeah, we got to remember the shuttle's paid for by the downtown parking lots, and if you've been downtown lately, there's not too many cars in the parking lot. So until that changes, there probably won't be much shuttle money coming into us.
And they're not collecting any. They're collecting any revenue from.
Yeah. And I just hope we're not underestimating the cost of the pandemic on us. I didn't hear any mention about the extra costs of sanitizing and cleaning the buses and everything, the extra things they're doing for the drivers. And I guess we can't recover cost of the extra staffing and things like that because we already have those staff on board. They're just not doing their regular jobs. They're focusing on this issue. So that's not probably a recoverable expense, but let's please keep track of every penny here, with every penny is going to count in the next step. That's it.
Great, thank you very much. I would just echo everything that my colleagues have said. What we're looking at are a series of unknowns as we go forward. The cost of the pandemic, both in terms of the shutdown, secondary impacts, the health impacts, are really going to basically be something which we're going to need to be very nimble, which I think staff has the ability to do. And we will be adjusting as we go, as Vice Chair Tabor outlined, even more so than we ever have in the past. And going to Director McQuarrie's comments, we will be looking at structural changes on how we provide service, I'm sure, and making those changes over the next 2 years, as General Manager Estrada has put out there. Mr. Davis, thank you very much for the report. Forward to the budget report coming up in June, because again, with all those unknowns, I think the board needs to be ready for the fact that staff won't be able to really nail down exactly what's going. So I'm sure they'll make their best effort to give. I think they see the future coming, but I think it's a work in progress for the next year to 2 years in that regard, and we'll all have to work together. Mr. Estrada, anything else on this one?
No, I think we've covered it. Main point I wanted to make is we're looking forward to that first board meeting in June where we'll present the budget with our best assumptions. And that'll be the big focus, I think, at that point, is the assumptions. And one last thing I'd like to point out is we're really grateful for the CARES Act funding. And, we've reached out to those that have helped get that for public transit around the country. You look at some of the local jurisdictions, the smaller cities and the county have not received that type of assistance. And that'll indirectly, affect us as well going forward in our assumptions. So just wanted to make that point.
I second that point in that regard. Okay, we'll move on then. Item 10, I want to dig right into it right here. The General Manager's report. Jerry, first, before you start, I just want to compliment Jerry before we go. I could save this but I want to put it up front because what you're in the discussion is an executive management team which has really stepped up. We've all said it in different ways, but an executive management team which has really stepped up to the challenge, addressing the issues, decision-making on the move. I just have to compliment Jerry and all of his staff, because I know working with him under the emergency declaration here, all of his staff and management staff and others within the team have been integral basically to moving forward in this uncertain time. So Jerry, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair Davis. Go ahead and get the slideshow started. It's going to open with a few pictures that I wanted to share of our employees and ultimately a video of our customers. And really, I wanted to say is thank you. I mean, when you look, it's not just the management team. I mean, everybody has stepped up, doing the best they can. And then we're not alone. Our entire industry has done so. But it's our bus drivers, our mechanics, they're out on the front lines every day through this. And they've been fantastic. I really appreciate them getting out there. And the reason we're operating today is because we serve essential workers. And that's why we're still operating. And moving forward, that's something we can't lose sight of. I think the approach that we took here at MTD when we were making decisions on the fly that never thought I'd have to make, quite frankly, we didn't just cut down to weekend service. Some went that route. We went a little bit more strategic. Our first service reduction plan focused on those schools, higher education, UCSB, city colleges. They were shutting down. We shut down specific lines that served them. Not all of them, but because there's still neighborhood service. But we focused on that. And then we quickly went with another reduction on April 6th to cut down a lot of the shuttles, which serving, downtown State Street, the tourism down, that sort of thing. Those were done to, reflect the demand, reflect the fact that we were concerned about workforce and the number of drivers was shrinking, available drivers, that sort of thing. But also long-term for the finances of the district, we have to adapt to this reality. And as Brad's financial presentation showed you, we're forecasting about what was nearly a $3 million revenue decrease in the fourth quarter to that's going to be rather significant. So we took steps early on, and ultimately we suspended 8 of our 24 routes. And our employees have been fantastic. We haven't had to lay anybody off at this point. I want to continue that. The CARES Act funds will really help us in that regard going forward. We work closely with Teamsters Local 186 throughout. I'd like to thank them for working with MTD through this process and communicating to our employees. And when you look, MTD internally started working on this in late February. Our IT staff, who I really want to commend, especially Mr. Zuniga and Mr. Sheldon as well, stepped up in late February and started building workstations for our staff so we can get as many out of here for telecommuting. They were ready by the second week of March. The disinfecting and cleaning program actually started before that, at the beginning of March. Mr. Robertson and his team, our utility workers, our janitorial staff, the vendors stepped up and provided extra workers. We've been disinfecting facilities in the buses every night since, essentially the beginning of March. That's going to continue. I don't see that stopping anytime soon. I think that's going to be a major step forward for the industry. Again, telecommuting is also something that's going to have, I think, a long-term impact for the agency in multiple ways, not just internally with our workforce, but with our riders out there. And we'll be adapting. And I think that's what the board members mentioned earlier about taking a good look at what our service and reimagining how we come out of this going forward. I've already discussed a little bit about service reduction plan B, as you see the timeline there. We also stopped the collection of fares in that third week of March. We closed the office. It remains closed, but it's available by appointment, that sort of thing. The board took its action at the end of March, declare a fiscal and public health emergency. We extended benefits to our employees temporarily for waiving premium, the health premium pro rata, that sort of thing, and allowing negative 80 hours of sick pay use. So if somebody didn't have the sick hours, but they weren't feeling well, we didn't want them to have to come to work. We wanted them to stay home. So we've been supportive of that, and we've stepped up on that as well. The annual service planning process really should have come to you with this meeting, or really this meeting typically, and that would have been for the August rollout. That's been suspended or postponed at this point. And honestly, I feel for the planning team, they did a fantastic job of getting us all the way up to that point, having some really good recommendations. And now it's going to be very different as we have to really see how things reopen the schools and local businesses so that we can then do what we do, which is provide public service that fits the demand from the public. And then recently, another decision was to require face coverings for everybody on board the bus, our drivers, our passengers. Obviously, we warned people the first time. We asked them, we've been urging like CDC guidelines, but now it's something we really want them to do to try and keep our employees and our customers both as safe as we reasonably can. And so far I've been pleased with the reaction from both the riders and our employees. People I think are really trying to work together to do things that maybe they weren't comfortable with, but recognize it's in everyone's best interest. And that's what we've done. What you see in the hard copy staff report or board packet were my weekly updates to the board, written updates. And that's out there for everyone to see. The focus there as you can see, if you look week to week, and I started in April with those, was kind of giving an idea of what we were dealing with almost daily here as things were coming at us. And the big one was ridership. There's a chart in there that shows you really just the impact COVID has had on our ridership. And we're down between 80 and 85%. It's closer probably to 81% at this point. And you can see as we took certain actions, what the impact was. But we really seem to have settled in around 4,500 to 5,000 rides per weekday. We're accustomed to much higher ridership. MTD is very successful. I think everyone knows that follows MTD in the Santa Barbara urbanized area. But 5,000 is about 4,500 to 5,000. What we're serving today seems to be holding there and starting to climb a little bit. But with that max occupancy limit, obviously there's potential. We're closely monitoring what other agencies are doing around the country in regard to how to safely provide this service. And we'll reassess that limit, especially now we have face coverings. We're also looking into other actions we can take to improve things on board the bus. Obviously, the disinfecting enhanced cleaning program is going to continue. And if anything, we're going to expand it. We're at a point where we're disinfecting facilities at the transit center here in Terminal 1 throughout the day, not just in the evening. So those are the actions we've taken. I think the reports that are included in the board packet give you the details from week to week. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, good. Jerry, do we have any public comment on this before I go to the board?
We do have one. Would you like me to?
Yes, let's go there before I go to the board.
Okay, we have two. And the first one was Howard Green. So I'm about to allow him to speak.
Okay.
It takes a moment, I think.
No, you're on. Howard, you're on. You
can hear me.
Yes,
Thank you.
you have 2 minutes. Go ahead.
Thank you. I think that Jerry has done a fine job in his weekly reports. I wish they hadn't been all bunched up, but that's fine. It's good to see. The projected ridership that he just mentioned of about 5,000 is at risk, though, because there are moves to be more open. And I guess I'd like to understand what mitigation activities are appropriate, because the too full or at capacity situation is rising. And so there was some mention of boosters, but I've never really understood how boosters would be implemented. That would be very interesting to expand upon if there's time. Thank you, sir. I'm through.
Thank you very much, Mr. Green. You have another comment, Mr. Estrada?
Yes, we do. Mr. Abel Garcia.
Mr. Garcia, if you be unmuted and you go ahead. Abel, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Very good. We can hear you.
Okay. Good morning, all directors. It's a pleasure to finally talk to you folks. I am Abel Garcia, Secretary Treasurer, Teamsters Local 186. And to all of you, and to especially Mr. Jerry Estrada, I commend you for the quick actions that you took during this pandemic crisis that we're in right now. It came very quick and very fast. Jerry involved me from day one, along with our stewards. Our stewards are communicating daily with Jerry and some of his other staff to things that need to be done, or making recommendations on to do things that they see to make our folks safer. With that said, I want to thank you, Jerry, for keeping us as a partner in this pandemic crisis. I commend you folks for also securing the COVID Act, the CARES package that hopefully gets here sooner than later to you folks, so we can keep the wheels on the bus turning. And that is all of our wishes, to keep that, and hopefully that this goes away sooner than later, but it looks like it's going to be later, and we must all work together, continue to work hand in hand. I appreciate you all for your doing for my members, your employees there, but also with this CARES Act money coming, I would like you folks to please look into these. These are essential workers. They're in a dangerous situation every day. being a bus driver or is one of the most dangerous jobs during this time right now, besides a healthcare worker. I would hope that you folks will look into getting them some financial relief by way of a hazardous pay. With that, that's all I got to say. Thank you. Keep doing the good work you're doing.
Thank you for your assistance and cooperation during this difficult as our partner, and we look forward to working with you further on the items that you brought up. Okay, Mr. Estrada, we will go to board question comments at this point, and I'll go starting at the top. Director Sheeler, questions and comments for Jerry.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I had, I guess it's 4 questions. If you could just please provide me with an update as to how you see these 4 things going forward. Number 1, the Kai Real project. Number 2, the renovation of the overpass site. Number 3, the potential or whatever for a fare increase. And finally, what happened with our request for cap and trade grant monies? Thank you.
Okay.
Jerry?
Yeah, happy to respond. On the Kai Real item, Chair Davis and I are scheduling a meeting with our attorney who's negotiating that. And we'll probably, after that, set something up for the ad hoc committee to get into the details of that. With Terminal 2, I'd say that ties into the cap and trade request, because where we left that was TIRSIP funding we had applied for to really build out Terminal 2 out at Overpass in Goleta. Unfortunately, we were not awarded any grant funding for that, but that doesn't mean the need doesn't exist. It does. We're moving forward. I'm hopeful that if there's any type of CARES 2.0 or an infrastructure bill coming from the federal government, that perhaps we'll be able to get that project and some of our bus replacement needs addressed. That's certainly what we will be advocating for if the opportunity presents itself. And then finally, on a fare increase, well, honestly, I think everything's been turned a little bit upside down with the pandemic as it pertains to that sort of thing. Really, I think the focus is going to be on the service levels and trying to maintain what we need to serve the community in the appropriate fashion as we reopen. But I don't see a fare increase being asked for or recommended anytime soon. So I think that answers all 4 questions.
Okay, thank you very much.
Jerry, thank you for the questions, Bill. Director Rodriguez.
I'm sorry. Did you say Rodriguez?
I did. Olivia Rodriguez, you're on.
I didn't hear the end. Sorry. No questions. Thank you.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Jerry.
Director Weinberg, any questions, comments?
Ask me a question.
Questions or comments, Dick?
Any questions or comments? You.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just bragging to Jerry or to Chuck what a wonderful job I thought Jerry and his crew were doing. I missed you. My only comment is thank you, everybody in the whole team. You've done a fantastic job, and this has been an outstanding meeting. Thank you.
Good, thank you very much. Director McQuarrie.
Just a couple of things on the general manager's report. There's a note in there about progress toward completing the solicitation documents for the fleet renewal campaign. Is that still viable in lieu of everything going on? I guess this is pertaining to painting the buses and whatnot. Is that still ongoing?
Absolutely. I think it's actually a critical need going forward, because it's more than just painting the buses. It's essentially refurbishing the fleet, potentially changing out engines, making significant improvements on board the vehicles to maintain the fleet. As you know, we have 114 bus fleet. A number of them are near their use towards the end of their life. We need to reinvest in them to extend their life and also to improve, I think, the customer experience. I think that's going to be critical going forward. It's not just disinfecting and cleaning, but it's also making sure that you're keeping those taxpayer assets up to in good shape. And that's what we intend.
It's good to hear that hasn't been lost with all that's going on. So thank you. I'm glad that's for what you're saying. And the other thing is, with the shuttle down in Carpinteria not visible, is that having any impact on our support that we're getting from Easy Lift? Because I think there's a criteria where they serve a given area surrounding our routes, and of course, without the shuttle going, it's cut off quite a bit of the area that MTD serves. So is there any impact on our agreement with Easy Lift?
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. I'd like to thank Easy Lift, and I'm glad you reminded me, and Mr. Paredes in particular, for their great work during this pandemic. We've been in communication. Their employees are right there with our employees on this. They've done a great job. As it pertains to Carpinteria specifically, the 20 still runs right through Carp Ave. And while the shuttle extended the range, the technical requirement a bit, the radius, we haven't asked Easy Lift to enforce that at this point. It's really our option. We have not taken, and as a result of any of these route suspensions, they haven't been eliminated officially. I have not asked the ADA paratransit provider to essentially restrict ridership or a request for a ride from anyone. So they're still continuing down that path.
Okay, again, that's good to hear. So I just wanted to bring that up to see that, we keep a focus on it, because they've done a great job in supporting us.
Yeah, they are an extension of us.
Right.
Is that it, Chuck? Great, thank you very much. We'll go to Director Perala.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I just want to echo what my colleagues have said as far as thanking you, Jerry. Thank you so much for your leadership. I bet you never in a million years thought something like this would happen. But I hope you're taking the time to take care of yourself too. I know it gets stressful. So I'm just hoping you take some time to take care of yourself, stay healthy, and we truly appreciate all you're doing.
Oh, thank you. You've got a great support team.
That's good advice, Madam Mayor. Hey, Vice Mayor. Yeah.
Yes, just a couple things. I appreciate the chart you showed there. It really puts everything in perspective, and it gives us a nice chronological look at the progression of steps we've taken and how deep they go. One other thing, I was glad to see some progress is being made on our light duty charging infrastructure for electric vehicles that may soon be seeing out in the parking lot. And lastly, it looks to me like with the staffing levels and the way the service is running now, the question of the unscheduled boosters seems to be the weak link in the process. And if there's any pattern that's showing up, it might be the next step we have to take to buttress our service. That's it.
Actually, on that point, I'd like to follow up. When we did service reduction plan B, we did free up a few drivers. We've had some return that originally left in March, and we're at a point now with our extra board that we have been able to perform the unscheduled boosters. And this is really a compliment to Hillary and her team. Again, they pretty much dropped the August planning process, and instead, and I meant to finish this thought earlier, because of the approach we took, and we went a little bit more surgical, I felt we were able to get a really good feel of where the essential workers were, since we just didn't drop down to weekend service. And they focused on that. They looked at our ridership data. They looked at our say overhead counters and got a feel for where the additional demand is. And they quickly put together three different booster runs, full-time work essentially, that as we have drivers available, and we've been able to do it in the last, say 3 weeks or so, they've been out there swooping people up. And, the focus there was where you have frequency every 15 minutes or even, 10 minutes, you probably don't need that booster. But if someone's going to be waiting a half hour or more, then we do. And they were able to put something together on the fly, and it's keeping our employees, keeping them working and also allowing us to provide that extra service. So we are doing what we can to handle unscheduled boosters.
Any other questions, Dave? Okay, good. Thank you very much. Well, you heard from all of us, Jerry. Thank the entire staff because it's a total effort. So team members basically done an incredible job. I have a real minor detail. This meeting's being recorded on YouTube. Is the link to that meeting going to be on our site so that people can actually go back and review this meeting?
Yes, it will be. And also one last final point. SoCal Edison is on site working on that electric vehicle chargers for our relief vehicles. They've halted construction for this board meeting and are scheduled to restart jackhammering at 10:30. So just a FYI, it's right behind me.
Here we go. Okay. Well, Jerry, again, thank you for that. But again, I'll go back to the original. It takes executive leadership at the top, and you've done an incredible in doing that. And you're through us, you've kept us informed. I basically being who you have contacted to talk over things. Impressed with your ability to basically, Chuck, you want to mute yourself? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Jerry, for that. We're now going to move our last item on the agenda, and that is a recent closed session. This is a conference with our legal counsel regarding existing litigation under section 54956.9A. This is a case with multiple dates of named injury, Teresa Sabah versus Santa Barbara MTD. Public, Jerry, on this item, go to question.
I don't see any public comment for this item.
Okay, with no public comment, we're going to go to closed session. We will take everyone else out of the meeting. Olivia, you have a question?
Yes, you're breaking up, and could you repeat the name, because I can hear it, but it's when you said we're.
The case Teresa Ceballos versus Santa Barbara MTD.
Thank you.
And there is no go to closed session. That means we will take everyone out of the meeting itself here. When we're done, we will come back to open session to report out any actions that we have taken.
I think we missed it because it's on the closed session.
Okay, you want to mute yourself when we get there. Okay. Any other questions before we go? Okay, Mr. Estrada, we will go into closed session at this point.
Okay, thank you. We'll get that done. Give us a few minutes.
Yep, no problem. A 2-minute, 3-minute break while staff basically puts us into closed session. Come back in 2 minutes or 3.